My MIL chemically burned my toddler's scalp to fix her black hair. My husband's response, take down the post or I'm filing for custody. The first time my mother-in-law met me, she touched my hair without asking and called it wild. When I asked her not to touch it, she said, but you must be used to it since you wear it like this, and touched it again. That should have been my warning. For 3 years of marriage, she's made comments. Such a shame you don't straighten it. You'd be so pretty with tamed hair. Hopefully the baby gets her daddy's good hair. When our daughter Maya was born with my exact curls, my Miles' first words were, well, let's hope you grow out of it. I kicked her out of the delivery room. Didn't let her babysit for an entire year. Last week, I caved. My husband and I needed one day, just one day, for our anniversary. His mother had been better lately, apologizing for past comments, promising she understood boundaries now. It's just 8 hours, my husband said. She raised me fine. She raised you white, I said. Please, she's trying. I agreed. My gut screamed no, but I agreed. When we returned, my daughter was sobbing. Her beautiful 3C curls were gone. Her hair was bone straight, fried, and platinum blonde. What did you do? I couldn't breathe. I fixed her, my Mill said calmly. The salon said the keratin treatment would last months. The color brings out her features better. She's 18 months old, and now she won't have to struggle with that mess anymore. My baby had been in a salon chair for 4 hours. 4 hours. Her scalp was burned, her edges were gone. She kept touching her head and crying, not understanding why her hair felt wrong. You chemically assaulted my child. Don't be dramatic, it's just hair. My husband stayed silent. Silent while I scooped up our daughter. Silent while his mother called me dramatic. Silent during the entire drive home. That night, while I applied aloe to my baby's burned scalp, I discovered something that changed everything. My Mill had posted photos on Facebook, spa day with my granddaughter, finally looking presentable. The comments were horrifying. Her friends congratulating her for fixing the baby. One said, thank God someone saved her from that nappy mess. Another, now she looks like she belongs in the family. But one comment stopped my heart. Didn't the same thing happen with Johnny's daughter? Johnny is my husband's brother. I called Johnny's ex-wife, Keisha, immediately. She's also black. They divorced 2 years ago. She did it to Aaliyah when she was 2, Keisha said, voice flat. Relaxed her hair behind my back. When I confronted her, Tom took his mother's side. Said I was overreacting. Said it was just hair. What happened? Aaliyah's hair fell out, in chunks. She was bald for 6 months. Tom still wouldn't admit his mother was wrong. Why didn't you warn me? I tried. At your wedding. Tom pulled me aside and told me if I caused drama at his brother's wedding, he'd take me back to court for custody. My hands were shaking. She's done this before. She'll do it again. To any black grandchild she gets access to. The family knows. They all know, and they let it happen. I hung up and went to my husband's office. He was on his laptop, working like nothing had happened. You knew, I said. Knew what? About Aaliyah. About what your mother did. He closed his laptop slowly. That was different. How? Keisha was always difficult about Mom. She was looking for problems. Your mother chemically burned our daughter's scalp. She meant well. Those 3 words ended something in me. I took photos of Maya's damaged hair, her burned scalp, her swollen eyes. I posted everything on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Tagged my mail, tagged the salon. Tagged everyone. This is what my mother-in-law did to my 18-month-old black daughter without permission. This is assault. Within hours, it went viral. 20,000 shares. The salon's page flooded with reviews about them chemically treating a toddler. My Miles phone wouldn't stop ringing. Then my husband said something that changed everything. Take it down or I'm filing for divorce. And I'll make sure my family gets custody. No judge will give a child to someone who publicly humiliated the grandmother. I looked at him. Really looked at him. You planned this. What? This was never about 1 day of babysitting. He didn't deny it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photo of legal documents. Check your email, the message said. Your husband's been planning this for months. Keisha. I opened my email with shaking fingers. The attachment loaded slowly, each second feeling like forever. Then I saw it. A PDF labeled Initial Consultation Notes, Thomas Henderson, Family Law. The date made my stomach drop. 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks before the babysitting incident. Before his mother touched Maya's hair. The attorney had typed everything in neat bullet points. Client concerned about wife's aggressive behavior toward mother-in-law. Wife prevents normal grandparent relationship. Document instances of wife's social media posts showing instability. Mother available for stable childcare if custody granted. I scrolled down and found more notes. Wife alienates child from father's family due to cultural differences. Plan. Create situation where wife's overreaction can be documented. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I kept reading. Tom had told this attorney everything. How I didn't let his mother babysit for a year. How I kicked her out of the delivery room. How I overreacted to simple comments about Maya's hair. The attorney had written a strategy. Let the grandmother have access. Document my response. Use it as evidence of parental alienation and instability. They planned this. Every single part of it. I screenshot the first page, then the second, then every page after that. My fingers moved fast, saving everything to 3 different places. I forwarded the entire email to my personal account, the one Tom didn't know about. Then I sent copies to a cloud storage he couldn't access. I opened my phone's notes app and started typing. Every conversation I could remember. Every text message. Every time Tom defended his mother. Every time he called me dramatic. I added timestamps for everything I could recall. The date his mother first touched my hair. The delivery room incident. Last week's babysitting setup. Tonight's threat about custody. I worked fast, knowing Tom could walk in any second. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Keisha. Save everything. Make copies. Hide them somewhere he can't find. Trust me on this. I heard Tom's car in the driveway. My heart jumped, but I kept my face blank. I closed all the apps and put my phone in my pocket. The front door opened and he walked in like nothing happened. Like he hadn't just threatened to take our daughter. Like he hadn't spent 6 weeks planning to destroy me. He smiled and asked what I wanted for dinner. His voice sounded so normal, so casual. I looked at him and felt nothing but cold clarity. I told him I'd order takeout because I was too tired to cook after dealing with Maya's burned scalp. He nodded and said that sounded good. Then he went to his office and closed the door. I ordered food and fed Maya, watching her touch her damaged hair. She whimpered every time her fingers brushed the burns. That night, I waited until Tom fell asleep. I listened to his breathing get slow and steady. Then I got up carefully and went to the closet. I pulled out a duffel bag and started packing. Maya's favorite stuffed animals. Extra clothes, diapers, her medical records from the filing cabinet, our birth certificates, my passport, the external hard drive with all my photos and documents. I packed everything that mattered and couldn't be replaced. I carried the bag to my car in the dark, moving quiet and quick. I opened the trunk and lifted the carpet covering the spare tire. I put the bag underneath and covered it back up. Tom would never think to look there. The next morning, I told Tom I was taking Maya to the doctor. He barely looked up from his coffee. He said okay and went back to his phone. I drove to our pediatrician's office and checked in. Dr. Chandler called us back within 20 minutes. He asked what happened and I told him everything. He examined Maya's scalp carefully, taking photos with his medical camera. He measured the burned areas. He documented the missing hair at her edges. He wrote notes about the chemical damage and how long she must have been in that salon chair. He gave me copies of everything. Then he said I needed to see a specialist. He wrote a referral to Samuel Hampton, a pediatric dermatologist downtown. He called ahead and got me an appointment for that afternoon. I thanked him and drove straight there. Samuel's office was in a medical building near the hospital. His nurse brought us back to an exam room right away. Samuel came in and introduced himself, then knelt down to Maya's level. He examined her scalp under a special magnifying light. He took more photos. He measured things I couldn't see. Then he sat back and explained what he found. The chemical straightener had burned through layers of Maya's scalp. Some of her hair roots were damaged so bad they'd never grow back right. The treatment wasn't approved for kids under 12. It should never be used on a baby. The 4 hours in that chair would have scared her badly. She couldn't understand what was happening or why it hurt. He typed all of this into his computer. Then he printed out a medical opinion on his letterhead. The words physical abuse appeared 3 times in the report. He signed it and gave me the original. He said I could use this however I needed. I sat in the parking lot after we left and called Keisha. She answered on the first ring. I asked if she'd really testify about what Tom's mother did to Aaliyah. She said yes without any hesitation. She said she'd been waiting years for someone to finally make that woman face consequences. She said Tom's whole family knew what his mother did to black grandkids, and they all let it happen. Then she asked if I'd talked to anyone about CPS yet. I said no. She told me to hold on. I heard her talking to someone in the background. Then she came back and said her friend Paulina could help. Paulina was a social worker who knew how these cases worked. Keisha gave me Paulina's number and told me to call right away. I called Paulina immediately. She answered and said Keisha had just texted her. She asked me to explain what happened. I went through everything while sitting in that parking lot. Maya played with her toys in the back seat, touching her head and whimpering. Paulina listened to all of it. Then she told me something that changed my whole approach. I needed to file a CPS report before Tom did. Whoever filed first got to control the story. If Tom filed and said I was unstable and making false claims, that's what CPS would investigate. But if I filed first with medical evidence and documentation, they'd investigate the actual assault. She walked me through exactly what to say and what documents to bring. I drove straight to the CPS office downtown. Maya fell asleep in her car seat during the 20-minute drive. The office was in a gray building near the courthouse. I carried Maya inside and approached the front desk. The receptionist gave me a form to fill out. I sat in the waiting area and completed every section while Maya slept against my shoulder. The form asked about the child's name, age, and what happened. I wrote down everything about the chemical burns, the 4 hours in the salon chair, the racist Facebook posts. When I finished, I brought the form back to the desk. The receptionist read it quickly, and her expression changed. She picked up the phone and made a call. 5 minutes later, a woman in her 50s came out to meet me. She introduced herself as the intake worker and brought me to a private office. I showed her the photos of Maya's burned scalp. I showed her the medical reports from Dr. Chandler and Samuel. I showed her screenshots of Tom's mother's Facebook post and all the comments calling Maya's hair a mess. I showed her my timeline of events with dates and times. The intake worker typed notes into her computer while I talked. She asked specific questions about Tom's mother's access to Maya and whether this had happened before. I told her about Aaliyah and gave her Keisha's phone number. She nodded and wrote everything down. Then she told me an investigator would be assigned to our case. She said someone named Marlene Webster would contact me within 24 hours to schedule a home visit. The visit had to happen within 48 hours of the report. She printed out a case number and gave it to me. She said to keep all my documentation organized because Marlene would need to see everything. I thanked her and left with Maya still sleeping on my shoulder. Back home, I fed Maya lunch and put her down for her afternoon nap. Then I sat at the kitchen table and organized all my evidence into folders: medical records in one folder, photos in another, screenshots of Facebook posts in a third, timeline of events in a fourth. I made copies of everything and stored the originals in a fireproof box. My phone rang around 3 o'clock. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I answered and heard a woman's voice ask for me by name. She said she was Marlene Webster from CPS. She explained she'd been assigned to investigate the report I filed. She needed to schedule a home visit and an interview with me. She also needed to interview Tom. I gave her our address and we scheduled the home visit for the next afternoon at 2 o'clock. Then she asked for Tom's phone number. I gave it to her. She said she'd be calling him to schedule his interview. My stomach dropped. Tom would know I filed the report as soon as Marlene called him. I had maybe an hour before he came home. I spent that hour getting ready for the fight I knew was coming. I put Maya's medical records and photos where I could grab them quickly if needed. I made sure my phone was fully charged. I texted Keisha to let her know what was happening. Tom came through the front door at 4:30. His face was red and his jaw was tight. He slammed his briefcase on the counter. He asked me what I did. I stayed calm and told him I filed a CPS report about his mother assaulting Maya. He started yelling about how I was trying to destroy his family. He said I was using our daughter as a weapon. He said his mother made one mistake and I was treating her like a criminal. He said CPS was for real abuse cases, not family disagreements about hair. I let him finish. Then I told him I knew about the divorce attorney. His face went completely white. I said I knew he'd been planning this for 6 weeks. I said I knew about the notes his attorney made about documenting my social media behavior. I said I knew the whole babysitting setup was deliberate. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then he started saying the attorney consultation meant nothing. He said he was just exploring options. He said every marriage has rough patches, and he wanted to understand his rights. He said I was overreacting to small incidents and making everything about race. I asked him what small incidents. He couldn't name any. He just kept saying I was too sensitive about his mother's comments. He said his mother loved Maya and would never hurt her. I asked him if chemical burns on a baby's scalp counted as hurt. He said that was an accident. I told him accidents don't come with Facebook posts celebrating fixing a baby's nappy mess. He had no answer for that. Tom went upstairs. I heard him moving around in our bedroom. Maya woke up from her nap and I got her a snack. Tom came back down 20 minutes later with a duffel bag. He said he needed space to think. He said he'd stay at his brother's place for a few days. I knew he was lying. He was going to coordinate with his attorney. The bag was small. He only packed a few changes of clothes and his toiletries. He didn't take his winter coat or his good shoes or any of the things he'd need for more than a week. He was planning to come back for his stuff later when he had legal papers in hand. He kissed Maya goodbye. She clung to him and cried. He told her daddy would see her soon. Then he left without looking at me. I locked the door behind him and sat on the couch with Maya. She kept asking where daddy went. I told her daddy had to go to work. She accepted that answer and went back to playing with her toys. I spent the rest of the evening preparing for Marlene's visit. Marlene arrived exactly at 2 o'clock the next day. She was a black woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional manner. She wore a blazer and carried a leather folder. I invited her in and offered her coffee. She accepted and we sat at the kitchen table while Maya played in the living room. Marlene asked me to walk her through everything that happened. I started from the beginning with Tom's mother's comments during our dating years. I explained the escalation after Maya was born. I described the babysitting incident in detail. Marlene took notes while I talked. She asked specific questions about the timeline and Tom's reactions. Then I showed her the medical documentation she reviewed. Dr. Chandler's report carefully. She looked at Samuel's opinion about the chemical burns. She studied the photos of Maya's scalp. Her expression stayed neutral, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. Then I showed her the Facebook posts. She read through all the comments. When she got to the ones calling Maya's hair a nappy mess and saying she finally looked like she belonged in the family, Marlene's pen stopped moving. She looked up at me. She asked if I had more examples of racist comments from Tom's family. I showed her 3 years' worth of text messages and emails. She photographed several of them with her phone. Then she asked about Tom's response to all of this. I told her about his silence during the incident and his threat to take Maya away if I didn't delete my social media posts. Marlene wrote that down. Marlene asked if there were other children in the family who'd experienced similar treatment. I told her about Aaliyah. I explained that Tom's mother had relaxed Aaliyah's hair behind Keisha's back when she was 2. I said Aaliyah's hair fell out in chunks and she was bald for 6 months. Marlene's interest changed immediately. She leaned forward and asked for more details. I gave her Keisha's full name and phone number. I explained that Johnny took his mother's side and that's part of why they divorced. Marlene asked if I knew of any other incidents. I told her about the 3 women who'd messaged me after my post went viral. All 3 had mixed-race children, and all 3 had experienced hair assaults from Tom's extended family members. I gave Marlene their contact information too. She wrote everything down carefully. Then she said a pattern of behavior across multiple children made this a much more serious case. She said she'd be interviewing all the other victims. She asked if she could take photos of my documentation. I told her to take whatever she needed. She spent 20 minutes photographing my evidence folders. Then she observed me interacting with Maya. She watched how I comforted Maya when she touched her head and whimpered. She noted how Maya's hair was growing back in patches. Before she left, Marlene told me she'd be completing her investigation over the next 2 weeks. She said she'd interview Tom, his mother, Keisha, and the other witnesses. She said I should expect a written report after that. That evening, I called the number Paulina gave me for Scarlett Hampton. A woman answered and I explained who I was and how I got her number. Scarlett said Paulina had already texted her about my case. She asked if I could come to her office the next morning. I arranged for Paulina to watch Maya and drove to Scarlett's office downtown. Her office was in a renovated brownstone with her name on a brass plaque outside. The receptionist brought me to a conference room where Scarlett was waiting. She was a black woman in her late 30s with natural hair and a sharp suit. She shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. She said Paulina had given her the basic outline, but she needed to hear everything directly from me. I went through the whole story again. Scarlett listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked to see my documentation. I'd brought copies of everything. She spread the papers across the conference table and reviewed them systematically. She spent a long time on the screenshots from Tom's attorney consultation. She studied the Facebook posts and comments. She read the medical reports twice. Then she looked up at me. Scarlett told me family court was complicated when one parent was white and had family resources. She said I had strong evidence of harm to Maya. She said the medical documentation was solid, and the pattern of behavior across multiple children were powerful. But she explained that Tom's attorney would frame this as a cultural misunderstanding rather than assault. They'd argue that different families have different grooming standards. They'd say Tom's mother meant well and didn't understand the significance of black hair. They'd paint me as overreacting and alienating Tom from his daughter. Scarlett said judges often struggled with these cases because they didn't understand the cultural context. A white judge might not grasp why chemically straightening a black baby's hair was an assault on her identity and not just a bad haircut. She said we needed to be prepared for that. She asked about Tom's involvement, and I told her about his months of planning. She said that was actually good for our case. If we could prove Tom conspired to create grounds for a custody battle, it showed he wasn't acting in Maya's best interest. It showed he was willing to let his mother harm Maya to build a case against me. Scarlett pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. She said we needed to document everything related to Tom's premeditation. We needed to show the timeline of his attorney consultation and how it lined up with the babysitting incident. We needed to prove he knew his mother would do something I'd react to strongly. She said Keisha's testimony would be crucial because it established that Tom had seen this exact scenario play out before with his brother. He knew what his mother did to black grandchildren, and he set it up anyway. Scarlett also said we needed to document Tom's family's pattern of racist behavior toward black children. The more examples we had across the family tree, the harder it would be for them to claim this was an isolated incident. She asked if I had financial resources for a custody battle. I told her I'd been a stay-at-home mom and had no income. She nodded and said that was another challenge. Tom would use my financial dependence against me, but she said we could argue for spousal support and child support. She quoted me her retainer fee, and I felt my stomach drop. It was more money than I had in my personal account. Scarlett saw my face and told me she offered payment plans for cases like mine. She said protecting Maya was worth the investment. I signed Scarlett's retainer agreement that afternoon. She said her first step would be to file a response to whatever custody motion Tom filed. She said to expect him to serve me with papers soon. She was right. 3 days later, a process server knocked on my door. He handed me a manila envelope and asked me to sign for it. Inside were divorce papers and a motion for temporary custody. I sat on the couch and read through Tom's petition. He claimed I was emotionally unstable. He said I was alienating him from Maya. He said I was making false abuse allegations against his elderly mother who was just trying to help with grooming. His attorney had written that I'd publicly humiliated his family on social media. They included screenshots of my viral post as evidence of my vindictive behavior. The petition asked for primary custody of Maya with supervised visitation for me. It said Tom's mother should be allowed unlimited access to her granddaughter. I read the whole thing twice. Then I called Scarlett. She told me to bring the papers to her office immediately. When I arrived, she read through everything carefully. Then she looked at me and said we had a fight ahead of us. But she also said Tom had made mistakes in his filing. He'd overreached by asking for supervised visitation for me. He'd shown his hand by defending his mother so strongly Scarlett said we'd file our response within the week. She said we'd fight this and we'd win. I wanted to believe her. 2 days later, Tom's response arrived through Scarlett's office. She forwarded me the PDF with a warning text to read it somewhere I could sit down. I opened the document at my kitchen table while Maya napped. Jeremy Morgan had written 43 pages painting me as everything I'd feared. The filing called me emotionally unstable and vindictive. It said I'd manufactured a crisis out of normal grandparent bonding. It claimed I'd weaponized social media to destroy Tom's family reputation because I couldn't handle minor cultural differences in hair care preferences. They'd attached screenshots of my viral post, my comments, every share and retweet. Jeremy had highlighted phrases like chemically assaulted and racist attack to make me look crazy. He'd included character references from Tom's family describing me as hostile toward them from the start of our relationship. His mother had written a statement saying I'd never let her bond properly with Maya because I was controlling and suspicious. The filing asked the court to recognize that I was alienating Maya from her father's family and using false abuse allegations as a weapon. I read through it twice, hands shaking, before I could call Scarlett. She answered on the first ring and asked if I'd finished reading. I told her yes, and she said we needed to file our emergency motion immediately. She'd already drafted the protective order request based on Samuel's medical report and the Facebook evidence. She just needed my approval to file it that afternoon. I gave her permission and she said she'd have it submitted within 2 hours. The motion was 37 pages documenting everything. Scarlett had included photos of Maya's burned scalp, Samuel's medical report, screenshots of every racist Facebook comment, and a detailed timeline showing the pattern with Aaliyah 4 years ago. She'd attached Keisha's written statement describing the identical assault and how Tom's family had protected the grandmother then too. The motion asked for an emergency hearing and a temporary protective order preventing any contact between Tom's mother and Maya until the court could evaluate the full situation. Scarlett explained that emergency hearings usually took 2 to 3 weeks to schedule, but she was pushing for faster because Maya was so young and the medical evidence was so clear. 3 days later, the court clerk called her office. They'd scheduled the emergency hearing for the following Tuesday, giving us exactly 1 week to prepare. Scarlett said that was unusually fast, which meant the judge had looked at our filing and seen enough concern to prioritize it. She told me to come to her office that afternoon, so we could start preparing my testimony. I needed to be ready to answer questions about the assault, about Tom's planning, about his family's history, about everything Jeremy Morgan would throw at me to discredit my claims. At her office, Scarlett walked me through what to expect. She said Jeremy would try to make me look angry and irrational. He'd bring up the viral post and claim I was more interested in public revenge than protecting Maya. He'd suggest I was overreacting because I didn't understand that white families have different hair care practices. She told me I needed to stay calm no matter what he said. I needed to speak clearly about the medical harm, the burns, the permanent follicle damage. I needed to let the evidence speak instead of getting emotional. We practiced for 2 hours. Scarlett played Jeremy's role, asking me aggressive questions designed to make me defensive. She pushed me on why I'd posted publicly instead of handling it privately. She suggested I was using Maya to punish Tom for his mother's innocent mistake. She asked if I had anger management issues. Every time I started to get upset, she stopped me and reminded me to breathe and focus on the facts. The facts were my power. Maya's burned scalp was a fact. The 4 hours in a salon chair was a fact. The racist Facebook comments were facts. Tom's 6-week planning timeline was a fact. I needed to present these calmly and let them do the work. That evening, Keisha called me. She said Scarlett had contacted her about testifying and she was absolutely willing to do it. She'd already pulled Aaliyah's medical records from 4 years ago showing the hair loss and scalp damage. She had photos documenting how bad it got before Aaliyah's hair finally grew back. She said she'd been waiting for this chance to make Tom's family face consequences for what they did to her daughter. She told me Johnny had called her after finding out about the hearing. He'd tried to convince her not to testify, saying it would hurt the family and accomplish nothing. She'd told him she didn't care about protecting people who hurt children. She said his whole family knew what their mother did to black grandchildren, and they all chose to look the other way, because admitting it meant admitting they were part of something ugly. Keisha asked how I was holding up, and I told her the truth. I was scared. I was scared of losing Maya, scared of Tom's family resources, scared the court wouldn't understand why this mattered so much. She said she understood completely because she'd been exactly where I was 4 years ago, but she said I had something she hadn't had back then. I had documentation, medical evidence, and proof of planning. I had a better case than she'd ever managed to build. The night before the hearing, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. He said we needed to talk privately about working this out without court. He said dragging his mother through a hearing would only make things worse for everyone, especially Maya. He suggested we could reach an agreement where his mother apologized and I dropped the protective order request. He said fighting in court would cost us both money we didn't have and create permanent damage to our co-parenting relationship. I screenshot the text and sent it to Scarlett before responding. She called me immediately and told me not to meet him alone under any circumstances. She said this was a strategy to get me to say something he could use against me without her present. She told me to respond only through her from now on. All communication needed to go through attorneys, so everything was documented. She texted Tom's attorney saying her client would not be meeting privately, and all settlement discussions needed to happen through proper legal channels. Jeremy responded within an hour saying that was unfortunate because they'd been hoping to resolve this amicably. Scarlett told me that was posturing for the court record. They wanted to look reasonable while painting me as difficult and unwilling to compromise. Tuesday morning arrived and I dressed carefully in clothes Scarlett had approved. Professional, but not too formal. Nothing that would make me look like I was trying too hard or not taking it seriously. I dropped Maya off with Paulina, who'd taken the day off work to help. Maya clung to me at the door and I had to peel her fingers off my shirt. Paulina promised she'd be fine and reminded me this was for her protection. The courthouse was downtown, a big gray building with metal detectors and security guards. Scarlett met me in the lobby and we went through security together. She carried a briefcase full of documents and evidence. She'd organized everything with colored tabs and told me she'd practiced her presentation 3 times the night before. We sat on a bench outside the courtroom waiting for our case to be called. Tom arrived with Jeremy Morgan, both of them in dark suits. Tom wouldn't look at me. Jeremy nodded politely at Scarlett like they were colleagues having a normal day at work. Keisha showed up 10 minutes before our hearing time, carrying a folder of her own documents. She sat next to me on the bench and squeezed my hand. She whispered that we were going to win this. The bailiff called our case and we filed into the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back tight. She looked at both sides and told us this was a preliminary hearing for the emergency protective order. She'd hear testimony and review evidence before making a decision on temporary measures. Scarlett stood and called Samuel Hampton as our first witness. He walked to the stand looking professional in his doctor's coat. He'd come straight from his morning clinic to testify. Scarlett asked him to describe his examination of Maya, and he pulled out his medical report. He explained that he'd examined Maya's scalp 5 days after the chemical treatment. He'd found second-degree burns on her scalp, significant damage to hair follicles along her hairline, and evidence of harsh chemical exposure inappropriate for any child under 12. He said the keratin treatment combined with bleach had created a chemical burn that would take months to heal fully. He testified that some of the follicle damage appeared permanent, meaning Maya might have areas of thinning hair for the rest of her life. The judge asked him directly if this kind of treatment was ever appropriate for toddlers. Samuel said absolutely not. He explained that children's scalps are more sensitive and their hair follicles are still developing. Chemical straightening agents aren't FDA approved for children under 12, precisely because of the risk of permanent damage. He said putting an 18-month-old through a 4-hour salon treatment involving harsh chemicals constituted medical harm regardless of intent. Jeremy tried to suggest that maybe the salon had made a mistake rather than this being anyone's fault. Samuel shut that down immediately. He said any licensed professional should know better than to perform these treatments on a toddler. The fact that they did it anyway suggested either gross negligence or deliberate disregard for the child's safety. Scarlett thanked him and he stepped down. Then she called Keisha to the stand. Keisha walked up confidently and placed her hand on the Bible for swearing in. Scarlett asked her to describe what happened to Aaliyah 4 years ago. Keisha pulled out her folder and began. She testified that Tom's mother had taken Aaliyah for an afternoon visit when she was 2 years old. When Keisha picked her up, Aaliyah's natural curls were gone, replaced by bone-straight, relaxed hair. The grandmother had said she'd gotten Aaliyah's hair done as a treat. Within a week, Aaliyah's hair started falling out in chunks. Keisha had taken her to a pediatric dermatologist who confirmed chemical burns and follicle damage from an adult-strength relaxer applied to a toddler's scalp. She'd confronted Johnny and Tom's mother, but Johnny had sided with his mother. He'd said it was just hair and Keisha was overreacting. The whole family had closed ranks, insisting the grandmother meant well, and Keisha was being difficult. Keisha showed the judge photos of Aaliyah's hair loss, patches of bald scalp, broken, damaged hair. A 2-year-old who'd been crying and scratching at her head for weeks. She testified that Aaliyah had been partially bald for 6 months before her hair grew back. The dermatologist had confirmed permanent thinning in some areas. Jeremy stood up to cross-examine her. He asked if she'd ever filed charges against Tom's mother for what happened to Aaliyah. Keisha said no, because Johnny had threatened to take her back to court for custody if she caused problems for his family. Jeremy suggested that meant it wasn't really that serious if she hadn't pursued legal action. Keisha looked him straight in the eye and said she'd been a young mother with no resources fighting her ex-husband's wealthy family. She'd been scared and alone, and she'd made the mistake of backing down. She said she wasn't making that mistake again by staying silent while another black child got hurt by the same woman. The judge told Jeremy to move on. He asked if Keisha had any proof that Tom's mother's actions were racially motivated, rather than just poor judgment. Keisha said the proof was in the Facebook comments celebrating that Maya finally looked presentable. The proof was in the grandmother's own words about fixing the nappy mess. The proof was in the pattern of her only doing this to black grandchildren while leaving white grandchildren's hair alone. Jeremy sat down looking less confident than when he'd started. Scarlett rested our case. Then Jeremy called Tom to the stand. Tom walked up looking nervous, adjusting his tie twice before sitting down. Jeremy asked him to describe what happened the day of the babysitting incident. Tom said he hadn't known his mother planned to take Maya to a salon. He claimed he'd been just as shocked as I was when we got home and saw Maya's hair. He said his mother had acted without his knowledge or permission. Jeremy asked if Tom believed his mother intended to harm Maya. Tom said no, absolutely not. He said his mother loved Maya and had been trying to help by getting her hair professionally done. He suggested maybe the salon had used the wrong products or applied them incorrectly, but his mother's intentions were good. Scarlett stood up for cross-examination. She asked Tom when he'd first consulted with a divorce attorney. Tom hesitated, then said he didn't remember the exact date Scarlett pulled out the documents Keisha had sent me. She asked him again, showing him his own attorney consultation notes dated 6 weeks before the babysitting incident. Tom's face went red. He said the consultation had been unrelated to the babysitting situation. Scarlett asked what it had been related to then. Tom stumbled through an explanation about exploring his options after months of tension in our marriage. Scarlett asked him to read aloud from the attorney notes where it said, "Document wife's social media behavior as evidence of instability," and "Mother can provide stable childcare." Tom read it quietly. Scarlett asked if it was just a coincidence that 6 weeks after writing those notes, his mother had done something that made me react strongly on social media, and then he'd immediately filed for custody. Tom said he hadn't planned it that way. Scarlett asked if he'd warned me that his mother had done the exact same thing to Aaliyah 4 years ago. Tom said that situation had been different. Scarlett asked how it was different. Tom said Keisha had always been difficult about his mother and had been looking for problems. Scarlett asked if he thought chemical burns on a toddler's scalp was a problem, or just Keisha being difficult. Tom didn't answer. The judge was watching him with a hard expression. She asked him directly if he'd known his mother had a history of chemically treating black grandchildren's hair without permission. Tom said he'd known about the incident with Aaliyah, but didn't think it would happen again. The judge asked why he'd left Maya alone with his mother if he knew she'd done this before. Tom said he'd thought his mother had learned her lesson. The judge's expression made it clear what she thought of that answer. She told both sides she'd review all the evidence and testimony before making her ruling. Then she announced her decision. She was granting a temporary protective order preventing Tom's mother from any contact with Maya. All of Tom's visitation would be supervised by a professional monitor until further notice. She was ordering a full custody evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist. She said the medical evidence of harm was clear, the pattern of behavior was documented, and the planning timeline raised serious questions about Tom's judgment and priorities. She said protecting Maya from further harm was the court's primary concern. Tom's face went white. Jeremy started to object, but the judge cut him off. She said this was a temporary order and they'd have a full hearing in 60 days. Until then, Maya's safety came first. The bailiff dismissed us and we filed out of the courtroom. Scarlett squeezed my shoulder and told me we'd won the first round. Keisha hugged me in the hallway. Tom walked past without looking at either of us, Jeremy following close behind, talking rapidly into his phone. I drove straight to Paulina's house to pick up Maya. When I walked in, she was playing with blocks on the floor. She looked up and smiled. Reaching for me, I scooped her up and held her tight, breathing in her baby shampoo smell. Paulina asked how it went, and I told her the judge had granted the protective order. Maya was safe, at least for now. My phone started buzzing before I even got Maya buckled into her car seat. Tom was texting, one message after another lighting up my screen. I waited until Maya was secure before I looked. The first message said I'd poisoned the court against his family. The second said I'd destroyed any chance of peaceful co-parenting. The third called me vindictive. The fourth said his mother was crying and couldn't understand why the judge believed my lies. I screenshot each one and forwarded them to Scarlett. She replied within minutes telling me to keep my phone on and not respond to anything Tom sent. He texted 14 more times that night. Every message showed he cared more about defending his mother than protecting Maya. Scarlett collected every single one as evidence of his priorities. 2 days later, Rosamond Hampton came to Paulina's house for the first evaluation session. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a calm way of moving that didn't startle Maya. She spent the first 30 minutes just sitting on the floor playing with blocks while Maya got used to her presence. She didn't try to touch Maya or get too close. She just observed, taking notes on her tablet about how Maya played and interacted. Then she brought out a stuffed bunny and slowly moved it closer to Maya's space. Maya reached for it but pulled back when Rosamond's hand came near her head to adjust the bunny's ear. The pulling back happened 3 more times during the session. Rosamond documented each reaction. She asked me questions about Maya's normal behavior before the assault, and I realized how much had changed. Maya used to love having her hair touched during bath time. She'd giggle when I worked shampoo through her curls. Now she cried and fought me every time. Rosamond noted that Maya had also stopped sleeping through the night and had started having accidents even though she'd been mostly potty trained. The regression was clear and documented. Rosamond scheduled my interview for the following week at her office downtown. I sat across from her in a room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that probably made most people relax. She asked about my family history first, then my parenting approach, then specific questions about Tom's family's treatment of Maya since birth. I told her about the comments, the touching my hair without permission, the hope that Maya would grow out of her curls. She asked if there were other incidents I'd dismissed or normalized. I started remembering things I'd pushed aside. Tom's aunt saying Maya would be prettier with straight hair at her first birthday party. Tom's cousin asking if I planned to relax Maya's hair when she got older. Tom's mother buying Maya a blonde baby doll for Christmas and saying she'd finally have a toy that looked like her. I'd told myself these were just ignorant comments from people who didn't know better. Rosamond wrote everything down and asked why I hadn't set firmer boundaries earlier. I didn't have a good answer except that I'd wanted to keep peace in my marriage. She noted that too. Tom had his interview 3 days after mine. I wasn't there, obviously, but Scarlett got a copy of Rosamond's notes later through Discovery. Tom apparently spent most of the session talking about how his mother meant well and didn't understand why I was so sensitive about hair. He said the chemicals burning Maya's scalp was an accident that could have happened to anyone. He called my reaction a cultural sensitivity issue, rather than a legitimate response to assault. Rosamond's report later included a whole section about his inability to recognize racial harm. She wrote that he prioritized family loyalty over child safety and showed no understanding of how his mother's actions damaged Maya's developing sense of identity. The report recommended supervised visitation until Tom completed cultural competency training and could demonstrate genuine understanding of the harm caused. Marlene Webster finished her CPS investigation around the same time. She interviewed Keisha about Aaliyah's experience. She talked to Samuel Hampton about Maya's injuries. She reviewed the salon records showing they'd performed adult chemical treatments on an 18-month-old. Her final report came to my email with a cover letter explaining she was substantiating the abuse allegation. The official findings stated that Tom's mother had committed physical abuse by applying dangerous chemicals to a toddler's scalp without parental permission, resulting in burns and permanent damage. The report recommended no unsupervised contact between Tom's mother and Maya. It also recommended mandatory parenting education, focused on cultural competency and the specific needs of biracial children. Tom's mother hired an attorney within days of receiving the CPS finding. Scarlett got served with a motion to overturn the substantiated abuse determination. The attorney's argument claimed Tom's mother was trying to help Maya fit in better with her peers and had no idea the salon chemicals would cause burns. They framed the whole thing as a cultural misunderstanding between a well-meaning grandmother and an oversensitive daughter-in-law. The motion included affidavits from Tom's mother's friends saying she loved Maya and would never intentionally hurt her. Reading those affidavits made me sick, because these were the same women who'd commented on her Facebook post celebrating the assault. While Tom's mother was fighting the CPS finding, the salon owner reached out through her attorney. The letter offered to settle any potential legal claims by covering all of Maya's medical expenses. It included an admission that the salon should never have performed chemical straightening treatments on a toddler regardless of who brought her in. The owner was clearly trying to avoid having her license suspended by the state board. Scarlett called me as soon as she received the settlement offer. She said accepting it was smart strategy because it established the salon's admission of wrongdoing in writing. That admission would strengthen our custody case by showing even the professionals involved recognized the treatment was inappropriate. The settlement included payment for ongoing dermatology appointments with Samuel Hampton and therapy sessions for Maya. I signed the agreement the next day. Tom's family started their own social media campaign that same week. His aunt posted about how I was keeping Maya from her loving grandmother over a simple haircut. His cousin shared a photo of Tom's mother crying with a caption about grandparents' rights. Several relatives posted similar messages framing themselves as victims of my anger and claiming I was using Maya as a weapon. None of them mentioned the chemical burns. None of them acknowledged the racist comments. None of them talked about Aaliyah losing her hair in chunks 4 years ago. They just painted me as the villain destroying a family over nothing. But my original post kept spreading beyond Tom's family's damage control attempts. I started getting messages from other Black women who'd experienced similar situations. 3 of them reached out specifically about Tom's extended family. One woman's daughter had been given a relaxer by Tom's cousin at a family reunion. Another woman's son had his locks cut off by Tom's uncle while staying overnight. A third woman said Tom's aunt had bleached her daughter's skin with lightening cream, claiming it would help her look less ethnic. The pattern went beyond Tom's mother. It was the whole family treating black children like problems that needed fixing. Scarlett filed subpoenas for all 3 women who'd contacted me about Tom's extended family within 2 days of getting their contact information. The depositions took place over 3 weeks at her office, with each woman providing detailed testimony about what happened to their children. The first woman, whose daughter got a relaxer at a family reunion from Tom's cousin, brought medical records showing scalp damage and photos of her 6-year-old crying in the bathroom as chunks of hair fell out. The second woman described Tom's uncle cutting off her son's locks while the boy slept during an overnight visit, claiming the hair made him look like a thug. The third woman had documentation from a pediatrician about chemical burns on her daughter's arms and face from skin lightening cream. Tom's aunt applied, telling the child she needed to look less dark to be pretty. Scarlett recorded everything, building a file that showed this wasn't about one grandmother making a mistake, but an entire family system that viewed black features as problems requiring correction. The pattern was impossible to dismiss as coincidence or cultural misunderstanding when it spanned 3 different branches of Tom's family tree and involved 4 separate black children over 6 years. Jeremy Morgan called Scarlett 2 days after the final deposition with a settlement offer. Scarlett responded by reading excerpts from the deposition transcripts, pointing out that Tom's family had done this to multiple black children, and every white family member had protected the abusers instead of the victims. She said Tom needed to prove he'd break that pattern before getting unsupervised time with Maya. Jeremy hung up without agreeing to anything. The temporary custody hearing happened 6 weeks after Maya's assault, in a courthouse conference room with fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and cold. Jeremy Morgan spent his opening statement focusing on my viral social media post, displaying printed screenshots on poster boards, showing the 20,000 shares and hundreds of comments. He argued I'd publicly humiliated Tom's elderly mother out of vindictiveness, that I'd weaponized my daughter's image for attention, that my behavior showed poor judgment and inability to co-parent respectfully. He called Tom to testify about how my post had affected his mother's health, how she'd received death threats and had to disconnect her phone. Tom sat in the witness chair looking exhausted and sad, describing his mother crying for days and asking why I hated her so much. Scarlett's cross-examination was surgical. She asked Tom when he'd consulted the divorce attorney. She asked if he'd known about Aaliyah's hair falling out. She asked why he'd stayed silent when his mother called Maya's natural hair a mess that needed fixing. Tom stumbled through answers that made his premeditation obvious and his priorities clear. Then Scarlett presented the medical evidence: Samuel's testimony about the chemical burns, photos of Maya's damaged scalp, and the deposition transcripts from the 3 other mothers. She walked the judge through the pattern systematically, showing this was coordinated family behavior targeting black children specifically. The judge took notes throughout, her expression growing stern as the evidence mounted. Rosamond's custody evaluation report arrived by email 3 days after the hearing. I opened it on my phone while sitting in my car outside the grocery store, hands shaking as I read her recommendations. She wrote that Maya should have primary physical custody with me, with Tom receiving supervised visitation, only until he demonstrated ability to protect Maya from his family's racist behavior. The report used explicit language, stating that Tom's mother had committed racially motivated assault on Maya's body and identity by chemically altering her natural black hair texture. Rosamond noted that Tom's inability to recognize this harm, his continued defense of his mother's actions, and his family's documented pattern of similar assaults on other black children created serious risk to Maya's psychological well-being and cultural identity development. She recommended Tom complete extensive cultural competency education and therapy, focused on understanding racial harm before progressing to unsupervised parenting time. Her evaluation included detailed observations of Maya's trauma responses, noting how the toddler flinched when anyone approached her head and showed signs of medical trauma from the 4-hour salon ordeal. The judge issued her temporary custody order 2 weeks later. I got primary physical custody of Maya, with Tom receiving supervised visitation twice per week for 2 hours each session. The order required Tom to complete a cultural competency program specifically designed for parents of biracial children before any visitation could become unsupervised. Tom's mother was prohibited from any contact with Maya during his visitation periods, with violation resulting in immediate suspension of his parenting time. The judge wrote in her order that protecting a child from racially motivated assault was not parental alienation, but rather appropriate parenting, and that Tom's premeditated planning to gain custody after his mother's assault showed his judgment was compromised by family loyalty over child safety. She scheduled a review hearing for 6 months out to assess Tom's progress in the cultural competency program, and Maya's adjustment to the custody arrangement. Tom filed an appeal within the 10-day window. His appeal brief argued the judge had shown bias by accepting the cultural framing of what he still called a bad haircut that went wrong. The brief claimed keeping Maya from her grandmother constituted parental alienation, and that the judge had improperly elevated my cultural concerns over the fundamental right of a child to know her family. Jeremy Morgan's legal argument tried to reframe the entire case as a custody dispute where one parent was using race as a weapon, rather than a child protection case involving documented racist assault. The brief included affidavits from Tom's relatives describing his mother as a loving grandmother who'd made an honest mistake, carefully avoiding any mention of the pattern across multiple children or the racist Facebook comments celebrating Maya's transformation. While the appeal sat pending in the system, I started packing. The salon settlement money gave me enough for first month, last month, and security deposit on a small apartment across town. Keisha helped me move boxes while Paulina watched Maya, the three of us loading my car with clothes, toys, and kitchen supplies over 2 trips. The apartment was tiny, just a 1-bedroom where Maya and I would share space, but the walls were mine, and Tom's mother would never walk through the door. Maya seemed calmer the first night there, sleeping through without the nightmares she'd been having in the house she'd shared with Tom. I set up her corner with her favorite stuffed animals and the books about black children with natural hair that I'd been collecting, creating a space where her curls were celebrated instead of attacked. Maya's first play therapy session happened 3 days after we moved. The therapist was a black woman who specialized in trauma recovery for toddlers, recommended by Rosamond. She spent the hour observing Maya play with dolls and blocks, taking notes about how Maya avoided the doll with curly hair and kept touching her own head while looking worried. After the session, the therapist told me Maya was showing clear signs of medical trauma from the salon ordeal, that 4 hours in a chair being burned with chemicals had taught her that her body wasn't safe and adults couldn't be trusted. She said Maya needed consistent, predictable care to rebuild her sense of safety, and that any disruption to her routine could trigger setbacks. The therapist recommended weekly sessions for at least 6 months, and said she'd be documenting Maya's progress for the court review hearing. Tom completed the court-ordered cultural competency program 4 months into the temporary custody arrangement. The program required 12 weekly sessions covering topics like biracial identity development, the history of black hair discrimination, white privilege in parenting, and how to protect children from racist family members. His final assignment was a 5-page essay reflecting on what he'd learned and how he'd apply it to parenting Maya. I read the essay after Scarlett got a copy from the program coordinator. Tom wrote about differences in grooming standards between cultures and how he now understood that some people felt strongly about natural hair. He described his mother's actions as misguided rather than harmful, saying she'd been trying to help Maya fit in with mainstream beauty standards. The essay talked about finding middle ground between my cultural preferences and his family's expectations, about teaching Maya to adapt to different environments. He never once acknowledged that his mother had assaulted Maya's body and identity. He never recognized the racism in calling her natural hair a mess that needed fixing. He never addressed why his entire family had targeted multiple black children the same way. Scarlett filed a motion to present Tom's essay to the court as evidence he hadn't internalized the program's lessons and still couldn't protect Maya from his family's racism. She attached the essay along with a statement from the program coordinator, noting that Tom had attended all sessions but seemed resistant to examining his own complicity in enabling his family's behavior. Scarlett argued that Tom's essay proved he viewed this as a cultural preference issue rather than understanding it as racist assault on a toddler's developing identity. The judge scheduled a hearing to review Tom's progress and ordered him to complete additional therapy, focused specifically on understanding racial harm to biracial children, with a different therapist who could assess whether he was genuinely developing awareness or just going through motions to regain custody. The supervised visits started 2 weeks after Tom finished his therapy program. The supervisor was a woman named Joy who worked for the court and sat in the room during every interaction between Tom and Maya. Her first report arrived in my email after the 3rd visit, and I read it sitting at my kitchen table while Maya napped. Joy wrote that Tom spent most of each 2-hour visit trying to explain things to Maya that an 18-month-old couldn't understand. He kept saying things like, "Grandma didn't mean to hurt you," and "she was trying to help," while Maya played with blocks or tried to move away from him. Joy noted that Maya seemed confused and upset when Tom brought up his mother, touching her own head and looking worried. The report said this pattern happened during all 3 visits, and that Maya showed more distress each time. Joy wrote that Tom's focus on defending his mother instead of just playing with Maya or building trust was making things worse. She recommended he stop mentioning his mother entirely during visits. I forwarded the report to Scarlett immediately. After each visit with Tom, Maya came home different. She clung to me like she hadn't since she was tiny, wrapping her arms around my neck and refusing to let go even when I needed to use the bathroom or make dinner. The first night after a visit, she woke up screaming 4 times. I brought her into my bed and she kept touching her head, running her small fingers over her hair and whimpering. The pattern continued week after week. Before visits, she seemed fine, playing normally and sleeping through the night. After visits, she regressed completely. She stopped using the few words she'd been learning and went back to just pointing and crying. She refused to let anyone except me touch her hair during bath time, screaming if I tried to let the daycare teacher help. I documented everything in a notebook, writing down the dates and times and specific behaviors. Maya's therapist wrote a letter to the court after observing this pattern for 6 weeks. The letter said the visits with Tom were causing increased trauma symptoms and that Maya needed a break from visitation to stabilize. The pediatrician wrote a similar letter after I brought Maya in for a checkup, and she wouldn't let him examine her head. Both letters noted the clear connection between Tom's visits and Maya's distress. Scarlett filed both letters with the court as evidence that the current visitation schedule was harming Maya. Tom's appeal of the custody decision moved through the court system slowly. His attorney filed paperwork arguing that the judge had been biased against his family and that keeping Maya from her grandmother was wrong. The appeal brief called the protective order excessive and claimed I was turning Maya against Tom's family. Jeremy wrote that the judge had accepted a narrative of racism, when really this was just a case of different grooming standards and family conflict. I read the entire brief when Scarlett sent it to me and felt sick. They were still calling it grooming. Still acting like burning a baby's scalp with chemicals was just a different opinion about hair care. 3 months after the original custody hearing, the appeals court issued its decision. The ruling denied Tom's appeal completely. The judges wrote that the trial court had properly looked at all the evidence of harm to Maya. They said the pattern of behavior toward multiple black children in Tom's family showed this wasn't an isolated incident. The ruling specifically stated that protecting a child from attacks based on race wasn't the same as parental alienation. The appeals court found that Tom had failed to protect Maya from his mother's racist assault, and that the trial judge was right to limit his custody. Scarlett called me when the decision came through. She sounded pleased and said this was a strong ruling that would make it hard for Tom to challenge custody again. 2 days after the appeal was denied, Jeremy called Scarlett with a settlement offer. Tom would accept reduced visitation in exchange for me dropping my request that he pay for Maya's ongoing therapy and medical bills. Scarlett explained the proposal to me over coffee at a shop near her office. She said that legally Tom should be paying for half of Maya's treatment since his mother caused the injury. But she also said the settlement would lock in my primary custody permanently and end the court battles. Scarlett told me this was actually a good outcome because it gave me what I really needed, which was keeping Maya safe and having main custody. I thought about it for 2 days. The therapy bills were adding up and Samuel's dermatology appointments weren't cheap. But having the custody fight completely finished sounded better than more months of court hearings and appeals. I told Scarlett I would agree. But with changes to the proposal, I wanted Tom's visitation to increase slowly based on what Maya's therapist recommended, not on a fixed schedule. I wanted Tom to pay for half of Maya's medical and therapy costs, not zero. And I wanted the protective order against his mother to stay in place until Maya was old enough to decide for herself whether she wanted contact. Scarlett negotiated with Jeremy for a week, and they reached an agreement. Tom got gradually increasing visitation that could move from supervised to unsupervised once Maya's therapist said she was ready. He would pay half of all costs related to treating the injuries his mother caused. His mother couldn't have any contact with Maya until she turned 13 and could make an informed choice about whether to see her grandmother. The final divorce and custody agreement was signed 4 months after the assault happened. I sat in Scarlett's office and signed page after page while she explained what each section meant. The agreement gave me primary physical custody with Tom having supervised visitation starting at 4 hours per week. The visits could increase and become unsupervised based on recommendations from Maya's therapist. Tom had to pay child support and half of Maya's medical costs. His mother was completely prohibited from contact. When I signed the last page, I felt something release in my chest. It wasn't relief exactly because Maya was still struggling and her hair was still damaged. But at least the legal battle was over. At least I knew she was safe. 2 weeks after the agreement was signed, I got a call from Maya's daycare director. Her voice was shaking when she told me what happened. Tom's mother had shown up at the daycare that morning claiming she had a right to see her granddaughter. She'd tried to walk past the front desk toward Maya's classroom. The director had followed the safety plan we'd set up months earlier. She'd told Tom's mother to leave immediately and called the police when she refused. 2 officers arrived within minutes and escorted Tom's mother off the property. She'd been yelling the whole time about her rights as a grandmother and how I couldn't keep her from her family. The director said Maya hadn't seen her grandmother because they'd kept the children in their classrooms during the incident. But other parents had witnessed everything, and several had asked questions. I picked Maya up early that day and called Scarlett from the parking lot. Scarlett filed contempt charges against Tom's mother that same afternoon. The filing included the police report from the daycare incident and a request for criminal charges if she violated the protective order again. We had a hearing 2 weeks later where the judge extended the protective order and added a provision that any future violations would result in criminal prosecution. Tom's mother sat in the courtroom looking angry, but she didn't try to speak. The judge told her directly that the protective order was in place for Maya's safety, and that showing up at her daycare was illegal. He said if she tried to contact Maya again in any way, she would be arrested. After that hearing, Tom's mother seemed to finally understand the court was serious. 6 months after the assault, I took Maya back to Samuel for a follow-up appointment. He examined her scalp carefully under bright lights and took measurements of her hair growth. The news was mixed. Her hair was growing back in most areas, coming in with the same beautiful curls she'd been born with. But some sections showed permanent thinning where the chemicals had destroyed the follicles completely. Samuel said the follicle damage meant those areas would always be thinner and might never grow back fully. He told me this was actually the best outcome we could hope for, given how severe the burns had been. Some children who experienced similar chemical injuries ended up with much larger areas of permanent hair loss. Maya's edges were still mostly gone and might take another year to grow back even partially. Samuel recommended continuing the gentle scalp treatments and avoiding any heat or chemicals on her hair for at least 2 more years. Maya's therapist gave me an update during our regular check-in meeting. She said Maya was making good progress in working through the trauma. The play therapy sessions showed Maya was starting to feel safer and more secure. She wasn't touching her head and crying as much anymore. But the therapist also noted that Maya still showed clear anxiety around hair care and became nervous when new people tried to touch her. She startled easily when anyone reached toward her head. The therapist recommended continuing weekly sessions for at least another year to help Maya fully process what happened and rebuild her sense of safety in her own body. 2 months after that therapy update, I sat in a community center meeting room with Keisha, setting up folding chairs in a circle. We'd posted about the support group in local parenting forums and Black Mother Facebook groups, keeping it vague enough to stay safe but specific enough that the right people would understand. 8 women showed up that first night, each one carrying the same tired look I saw in my mirror every morning. They ranged from early 20s to mid-40s, but we all had the same story with different details. One woman's white mother-in-law had used bleaching cream on her 3-year-old son's skin while babysitting, saying she wanted to help him look more like his father's side of the family. Another had her daughter's locks cut off by her ex-husband's new wife who said they looked dirty. A third discovered her mother-in-law had been secretly relaxing her 5-year-old's hair every weekend for months, telling the child it was their special secret. We went around the circle sharing our experiences, and with each story I felt less alone and more angry at how common this was. Keisha talked about Aaliyah's bald patches and the family members who still insisted it was just a haircut gone wrong. I showed photos of Maya's burned scalp and the Facebook comments celebrating the assault. By the end of that first meeting, we'd created a shared document listing culturally competent family lawyers, pediatric dermatologists who understood Black hair, and child psychologists experienced with racial trauma. We scheduled our next meeting for 2 weeks later and promised to keep each other updated on our custody battles. 3 weeks after that first support group meeting, Tom's therapist sent a letter to the court certifying he'd completed the required cultural competency program and additional therapy focused on understanding racial harm. The letter said Tom had demonstrated genuine growth in recognizing how his mother's actions were racist and traumatic, not just a grooming choice. Scarlett reviewed the letter carefully and talked to the therapist directly before agreeing to unsupervised visitation. Tom's first solo visit with Maya lasted 2 hours at a park near my apartment. I sat in my car in the parking lot the entire time, watching them play on the swings and feeling my stomach twist with worry. But Maya seemed okay when I picked her up, chattering about the ducks they'd fed and not showing the same distress she'd had after visits where Tom defended his mother. His visits gradually increased to 4 hours, then 6, then overnight stays on weekends. The supervised visitation reports from the previous months showed a clear shift in how Tom interacted with Maya once he stopped trying to minimize what his mother had done. He focused on rebuilding trust with our daughter instead of rehabilitating his family's reputation. Maya started looking forward to daddy time again, which hurt and relieved me in equal measure. The salon license suspension came through 4 months after the assault. The state licensing board held a hearing where I testified about Maya's injuries and provided Samuel's medical reports documenting the chemical burns. The board reviewed the salon's records and discovered they'd performed chemical treatments on 3 other children under age 5 in the past 2 years, all without proper parental consent documentation. They suspended the salon's license for 6 months and required implementation of new policies including mandatory parental consent forms, age verification for all chemical services, and staff training on appropriate treatments for children. The owner sent me a formal written apology 2 weeks after the suspension, saying she took full responsibility for not questioning why an 18-month-old needed keratin treatment and platinum blonde color. She said she'd been so focused on pleasing a regular customer, Tom's mother, that she'd ignored her professional judgment about what was appropriate for a toddler. The apology felt hollow because it came only after legal and financial consequences, but at least it was documented proof that what happened to Maya was wrong. Tom's mother's attorney letter arrived 5 months after the assault, delivered by certified mail to Scarlett's office. The letter was 2 pages of carefully worded apology, acknowledging that her actions had been harmful and racist, that she'd failed to respect my role as Maya's mother, and that she understood why the protective order was necessary. It requested the possibility of supervised visitation when Maya was older and able to make her own informed decisions about contact with her grandmother. Scarlett read the letter aloud to me in her office and pointed out all the places where you could tell the attorney had written it instead of Tom's mother. The phrases were too legally precise, too perfectly crafted to avoid admitting criminal liability while still sounding apologetic. Tom's mother had never used words like harmful or racist in her life, and suddenly she was writing paragraphs about respecting cultural identity and maternal authority. Scarlett asked if I wanted to respond, and I said no immediately. Maya's well-being was my priority. Not giving Tom's mother a chance at redemption she hadn't actually earned, Scarlett filed the letter with the court as evidence that Tom's mother was aware of the protective order terms and the reasons for it. But we maintained our position that contact should remain prohibited until Maya was old enough as a teenager to make her own informed choice about whether she wanted a relationship with her grandmother. Maya turned 2 years old on a sunny Saturday in October. I threw a small party at our apartment with Keisha, Aaliyah, Paulina, and 3 other women from the support group who'd become regular parts of our lives. We kept it simple with a homemade cake, balloons, and a pile of presents focused on books and toys that celebrated Black culture and natural hair. Maya wore a purple dress, and her hair was pulled back in small twists that I'd learned to do from YouTube videos, and advice from the support group. Aaliyah, now 6 years old, helped Maya blow out her candles and showed her how to open presents without ripping the paper too much. Watching the 2 girls play together, I felt grateful that Maya would grow up with Aaliyah as a cousin figure who understood what she'd been through. The party was full of laughter and felt nothing like the tense family gatherings I'd endured during my marriage. These were people who truly saw Maya and me, who celebrated her beautiful brown skin and natural curls instead of trying to fix or change them. Tom came by after the party to drop off his present and spend an hour with Maya. He was respectful of the boundaries, didn't try to come inside, and didn't ask about his mother. Our relationship would never recover from his betrayal, but at least we were building something functional for Maya's sake. Tom and I established our co-parenting relationship through an app called Our Family Wizard that documented every message, schedule change, and expense. The app kept everything businesslike and focused solely on Maya's needs, rather than our failed marriage or his toxic family. He paid child support on time every month and followed the custody schedule without trying to push for extra time or making last-minute changes. When Maya got sick, he responded quickly to updates and offered to adjust the schedule so she could recover at home with me. When she had doctor appointments, he asked for copies of the reports and made sure his insurance covered everything properly. It was functional and respectful, which was more than I'd expected after everything that happened. But I knew our relationship would never recover from what he'd done. The man who'd planned for months to take my daughter away, who'd stayed silent while his mother assaulted our child, who'd threatened me with custody loss when I tried to protect Maya. That man had killed whatever love or trust had existed between us. We were co-parents now, nothing more. And that was exactly how it needed to stay. I went back to work part-time when Maya was 26 months old, taking on freelance graphic design projects from home and in a small shared office space downtown. Paulina provided childcare 3 days a week, and Maya went to her regular daycare the other 2 days. The financial independence felt crucial after experiencing how Tom had used my dependence on his income as a weapon during the custody battle. My own money meant I could make decisions about Maya's care, our living situation, and our future without needing to negotiate or compromise with him. The design work felt good too. Using a part of my brain that had been dormant during the intense months of legal battles and survival mode, I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed creating things, solving visual problems, and having professional accomplishments separate from being Maya's mother. The part-time schedule gave me balance, enough work to feel independent and fulfilled, but enough time with Maya to stay connected to her healing process and daily needs. Maya's hair continued growing in her beautiful natural curl pattern in the areas that hadn't been permanently damaged by the chemicals. The front and crown came in thick and healthy, showing the same 3C curls she'd been born with. The edges were still thin, and the back left section would probably always be sparse where the follicles had been destroyed. But overall, her hair was recovering better than Samuel had initially predicted. I learned protective styling techniques from other Black mothers in the support group and from natural hair care videos online. I practiced 2-strand twists, bantu knots, and simple braiding patterns that kept Maya's hair moisturized and protected while it grew. The other mothers taught me about proper products, sulfate-free shampoos, leave-in conditioners, natural oils, and about how caring for our daughter's hair was an act of cultural preservation and love. Every time I sat with Maya between my knees, gently detangling her curls and styling them into protective twists, I was undoing the damage Tom's mother had tried to inflict. I was teaching Maya that her natural hair was beautiful and valuable exactly as it grew from her head. I was showing her that her mother would always protect and celebrate who she was, not try to change her into something more acceptable to white family members. 1 year after the assault, I sat on a blanket at the park watching Maya play with Aaliyah on the jungle gym. Maya's laugh rang out clear and happy as she climbed the ladder and slid down the slide, her twists bouncing with each movement. Keisha sat next to me, both of us keeping watchful eyes on our daughters while talking about the support group's plans to create a legal resource guide for other Black mothers. We'd survived calculated attacks on our families, navigated hostile legal systems, and built new lives centered on safety and cultural pride. The scars remained, both physical and emotional. Maya's hair would never fully recover in some areas. She still showed anxiety around new people touching her head. I still had moments of rage thinking about Tom's months of planning and his family's collective racism. But we were building something good from the wreckage. Maya was thriving with chosen family who truly saw and valued her. I had independence and a support network that understood our experiences. Tom had become a functional co-parent who finally prioritized Maya's well-being over his mother's feelings. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were actually living, surrounded by people who loved us exactly as we were, and I felt cautiously hopeful about our future for the first time in a year. The support group I started with Keisha 6 months ago now has 20 women attending our weekly meetings at the community center downtown. We meet every Tuesday evening after the kids go to bed, sitting in a circle of folding chairs while we share stories that sound too similar to be coincidence. Last month, we finished writing a legal guide that explains custody rights when white family members assault black children's hair or skin. Keisha handles the legal research part since she went through it all with Aaliyah, and I organized the practical advice about documentation and evidence collection. We created a list of attorneys who actually understand why chemically burning a toddler's scalp isn't just a bad haircut. Lawyers who won't tell black mothers they're overreacting when white grandparents attack their children's identity. Scarlett's name is at the top of that list with 5 stars next to it. The network we built includes 12 women willing to testify in court about patterns of racist harm in custody cases, mothers who survived similar attacks and came out the other side ready to help others fight. We print copies of everything at the library and hand them out for free, because we remember what it felt like to navigate this alone. I'm not the person I was 18 months ago when Tom's mother walked into that salon with my baby. That version of me trusted too easily, ignored red flags, and believed people when they promised to do better. Now I document everything. Trust my gut and understand that protecting Maya means staying vigilant even when things seem calm. I learned to spot the warning signs other mothers miss, the small comments that reveal deeper racism, the boundary violations that escalate into assaults. Maya will grow up knowing her mother fought for her when it mattered most, that I chose her safety over keeping peace with people who wanted to erase her identity. She'll understand that the curls growing back on her head represent more than hair. They're proof that we survived an attack meant to break us. The community we built celebrates everything about Maya exactly as she is, her beautiful brown skin and her natural curls and her bright laugh that fills our apartment. We're not just surviving anymore, we're actually thriving, surrounded by chosen family who see us and value us and would never ask us to be anything other than ourselves.